Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So in this video I'm going to be talking about I Am Not Sidney Poitier by Percival Everett, which I read once before several years ago now, and I found on a second reading that I really remembered a lot of the details of it, so this was definitely a book that stuck in my mind for a long time. And that is probably because this book is very entertaining, it's very funny, but it's still got a lot of depth to it, and the issues it addresses in its sort of satirical way are very complicated and interesting for these characters. So the story is about a boy named Not Sidney Poitier. So Not Sidney is his name. So this alone, being an odd name, causes some issues for him, but as he gets older, he starts to look a lot like the actor Sidney Poitier, which confuses the issue of his identity even more. So the book follows Not Sidney through various misadventures, all of which mirror some existing Sidney Poitier movie in some way. Of course, then every mirror of one of those real movie plots is subverted in some way for Sidney, and in those subversions, the stories addressing race and class and the individual's identity within that. So for me, as a relatively young person reading this, I have not seen most of the Sidney Poitier movies that are being referenced throughout the book. I sort of looked it up and researched a little bit. The only one I had seen was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which I imagine would be one that a lot of people have heard of, even if they're closer to my age. So the book is very irreverent in tone, it's funny, there's a lot of sort of comical situations and dialogue throughout. So I just wanted to start by reading just the opening paragraph of this novel. I am the ill-starred fruit of a hysterical pregnancy, and surprisingly, odd though I might be, I am not hysterical myself. I'm rather calm, in fact, some might say waveless. I am tall and dark, and look for the world like Mr. Sidney Poitier, something my poor disturbed and now deceased mother could not have known when I was born, when she named me not Sidney Poitier. I was born after 2 years of hysterical gestation, and who knows what happens in a mind when expectant, anticipative for so long. 2 years. At least this was the story told to me. So right off the bat, Not Sidney's entrance into the world is one of myth and legend and strangeness. And I think it's a particularly good opening paragraph. It definitely hooks you in and sort of sets you up to just accept the oddities and the absurdities of the world that Not Sidney lives in, which of course in a lot of instances looks a little scarily like our own. A lot of the humor in this is definitely coming through in the dialogue. Obviously, every single time Not Sidney meets somebody new, it's a funny interaction because they ask what his name is and he says, Not Sidney, and they say, well then what is it, right? So that happens a lot. But then there are a couple side characters that I'll talk more about that insert a lot of humor into the book and are kind of always going off the point and are ultimately very confusing for Not Sidney. So Not Sidney as a child lives in Los Angeles with his mother, who we have established is a bit strange. But with her oddness and her eccentricities, she's clearly a very smart woman. So she invests like all of her money in Turner Broadcasting at the ground floor, and then she is very, very rich, even though she doesn't live like it. She's just sort of sitting on this money. And Ted Turner himself, who is a character in this book, has a lot of respect for her. So when Not Sidney is 11 years old, his mother passes away, leaving him an orphan with a rather large inheritance. and then he moves to Atlanta to go live with Ted Turner. So that's an interesting thing about this book, is that some of the characters are based on these real people, but they're kind of creative caricatures of those people. So Ted Turner is one of the funnier characters. He has a lot of the really funny dialogue moments because he's kind of always going off on these seemingly random tangents. But he becomes in Not Sidney's life not exactly a father figure, maybe more like a mentor. And then this book is like taking place at the time that Ted Turner is married to Jane Fonda, so there's a kind of caricature representation of her as well, which upon reading this the second time and having become more familiar with Jane Fonda's career, I don't know if her portrayal is super fair in this, but I mean, it's all obviously so heavily fictionalized and absurd. I think it would be weird if somebody tried to take these as literal portrayals of these people. So Not Sidney is living with Ted Turner in Atlanta. Obviously, Ted Turner is very wealthy. Not Sidney himself is also very wealthy, though the money just seems sort of like this abstract thing to him. He doesn't take advantage of the privileges he has with the money very often as a kid. And then he has various misadventures with being a black man in the Deep South. As Ted Turner says in this book, once you leave Atlanta, you're in Georgia. So multiple times in this book, Not Sidney is somewhere driving around in the Deep South and basically getting arrested for no reason. And so he has these encounters with these really impoverished, struggling people. And, you know, there's this one moment where he wants to feel bad for them, to have this sympathy for them, but they hold this hatred for him or this disdain because he is a black man. And he can't really get past that to the point of pitying them. As he gets older, he sort of decides on a whim that he wants to have a college experience. So using the money and the power that he has because of his money for the first time, which I think he finds a little disturbing, this power that he discovers, he buys his way into a school and spends a little bit of time there. And that is where he meets Professor Percival Everett. Yes, same name as the author of the book. Now again, just as you can't expect the I am not Sidney Poitier Ted Turner to be like the real life Ted Turner, I think Percival Everett as a character pokes fun at the author himself, but is not a literal interpretation. It's a really fun little element to sort of plug into the story. And Percival Everett, similar to Ted Turner, is a very comedic character. He teaches a class about nonsense, and the joke is that all of his lectures, it all just sounds so complicated and above the students' heads that it basically is nonsense because they don't understand what's going on. So we're following Not Sidney through all of these different chapters. Each sort of episode of his life that we see echoing a Sidney Poitier movie. And we see Sidney go on this journey where he's trying to figure out, how does he identify and fit into the world as a black man, and also how does class play into it because he is extremely wealthy. And then we see him wrangle with this sort of existential issue of being not Sidney Poitier and being in some way defined by being not this other person who you also happen to look a lot alike. And I think power dynamics are playing a big role in all of this, figuring out his identity and where he sort of fits into the world. When Not Sidney's young and he's being bullied, he learns about mesmerization, which is a kind of strange method he discovers he can use to control people's minds, a power he uses a couple times throughout the book. I know this is like another strange element on top of many strange elements. Yeah, I mean, similarly to having all of this money, Not Sidney finds this way that he has this power over other people, but it doesn't work all the time. So another interesting element to this is that there are a few scenes where Not Sidney is dreaming and he's in sort of a character role of someone else from a different time and place. So this is kind of the window into some of the Sidney Poitier movies that would be harder to represent for like a kid living in Atlanta. So we have these like transported moments where Not Sidney is, you know, like a slave in New Orleans, and there's this like whole plot happening there. I don't know, I mean, we see Not Sidney take on these different identities that are very different from his own. I mean, you know, we read the first paragraph, he talks about how he has a calmness, and I don't know, it's almost like Not Sidney feels sort of like a blank slate for some of the things that happen to him, and these experiences in his dreams that are completely not his own are, you know, applied to him in some way, and it's just more identity confusion. One thing that I want to note that I think this book handles really well, when Not Sidney is in high school, he is coerced by a female teacher into an affair. And I don't want to generalize, but in my experience reading, I think when male authors are writing about situations like this where there's, you know, a power dynamic in a sexual relationship, I feel like they often get it wrong. Maybe these things are getting better with more modern writers, but I think male writers as opposed to female writers who maybe have experienced the reality of this more prevalently in their lives, male writers don't seem to see these power dynamics and how power dynamics make these sexual encounters not something that is a fantasy, but something that is rape and assault. That's a relatively short episode in this book, but Percival Everett makes it all about the power dynamic and is certainly not fantasizing it in any way, which I think is a very important and realistic portrayal in a book that, you know, has a lot of humor and silliness to it as well. So then, of course, as I mentioned, Not Sidney has some run-ins with cops. Of course, you know, in the first instance, saying that his name is not Sidney Poitier is taken as some sort of act of disrespect. Obviously, it doesn't seem to matter what his name is, who he is, to these cops he's encountering in the Deep South. He is just a black man. So, I mean, Not Sidney's first interactions of this kind, really he's been fairly sheltered from it. I mean, he goes to school and he has negative interactions with people there, but I think his wealth has sort of protected him in his early life from really having to face his racial identity. And the encounters with the police kind of force him to look at that part of himself. And I don't know, the scenes, I mean, they clearly are picking fun at these cops who just seem, you know, dumb, really. But I mean, it's hard to shake sort of the seriousness of it all too. So another part of the book in which Not Sidney is sort of figuring out his racial identity and his feelings towards that is the part of the book that mirrors Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. in which Not Sidney goes home for Thanksgiving with his girlfriend, who is a very light-skinned black woman. And what Not Sidney discovers there is that her parents have this sort of deep-seated self-hatred and all these issues with colorism, and they immediately don't like Not Sidney because he is very dark. So Not Sidney sort of reflects that he's never really thought about the fact that he is particularly dark before, and then, you know, he comes to this like uncomfortable realization that once they point it out, he starts looking at other people and thinking, how relatively dark are they compared to him? And then her parents overcome this issue of him being too dark when they discover that he's very rich. So again, we're seeing these issues of wealth and class sort of interplaying with the racial identity. So this kind of forced confrontation with this family kind of really makes Not Sidney own that he is a black man and he doesn't want to be white, which is, you know, what this family is. So again, it's all about his identity, how he sees himself, categorizes himself in the world. And then obviously the identity issues are magnified even more because of his name. So that, I think that brings us to the ending of the book. So as we see Not Sidney grow up and get older, and obviously going through all these Sidney Poitier movie plots, we see Not Sidney become more and more like Sidney Poitier, the actor. So people keep commenting on it, saying, oh, you look so much like Sidney Poitier, and that just increases as he gets older. And then towards the end, after some sort of harrowing experiences, he describes himself as feeling like he's aging so quickly, like he's, you know, inching closer and catching up to the age that Sidney Poitier, the actor, is. And then at the end, in some little small nowhere town in Alabama, Not Sidney falls in with these nuns. I guess they're not nuns, they're not Catholic, but the sisters, and he's helping them try to build their church, and he gets $50,000 in cash, and then he gets really terrified because he realizes, I shouldn't be carrying $50,000 in cash here, someone's gonna try to kill me for it. And someone does, but they kill another young black man who also happens to look exactly like Not Sidney. So then it's like this sort of strange question of, but is that dead body Not Sidney? Because he looks at it and he's like, that it looks exactly like me, and then he's trying to figure out who killed this man because it feels like he's solving his own murder. And then, you know, following the death of this other man, Not Sidney kind of fully becomes the actual Sidney Poitier. So he flies to LA and he has this VIP treatment, and it seems like maybe it's like a case of mistaken identity because he just looks like him, right? But Not Sidney himself, he's acting like that's his role and that's where he is. He is Sidney Poitier. And then he goes and he accepts this award. And the final line, which Not Sidney says, is what is going to go on his own gravestone, and what he wants to put on his mother's gravestone is, I am not myself today. So that ending, all of that happens in a very short span in the last few pages of this book, and it really sort of throws on its head this idea of identity. Like, is it just a coincidence that there was someone else who looked exactly like him and exactly like Sidney Poitier that died? And is it just mistaken identity that he went and accepted this award as if he was Sidney Poitier? Or did not Sidney die in Alabama and now he is Sidney Poitier? You know, this what's in a name question. I'm not gonna lie and say that I fully have all the pieces together of what I make of the ending and what I understand of it. But I do know that I am fully engaged in the process of getting there. So this is a very funny, entertaining satire novel, but it also leaves this seed of depth that you kind of mull over after reading for a while. And so that commentary and the themes that this work explores are very complicated because we're looking at identity on this very philosophical high level, and then we're looking at these sort of societal categories and issues and how that affects the individual. And, you know, we're looking at race and class and how all of these things are intersecting for not Sidney as he tries to move in the world. So there are lots of other Percival Everett books that I would definitely like to pick up and read. Thus far, this is my only Percival Everett book that I've read. I did once read a short story by him called The Appropriation of Cultures, in which a black man reclaims the Confederate flag. It's a pretty short story, so that might be one to look up just to get a taste of him as a writer. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in getting my hands on more Percival Everett books and reading some more, because I really love this book. All right, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching. Bye.